Welcome to Your College-Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, the Common App will no longer ask about discipline records. An article by Elana Lyn Gross of Forbes. Mark and Anika will discuss, how do I accept a federal student loan? Our question from a listener is, how can I tell how selective a college is? Our interview is Amin Gonzalez, the Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid of Wesleyan University. How to use the additional information section of the Common App. And our college spotlight is the University of New Mexico.
Dave, welcome back, my friend. How are we doing?
We're doing great. First of all, I would like to so much thank you, Mark, for the wonderful dedication to my father and for the kind words that you said, and also for all those listeners who sent their condolences, specifically Lorraine and Tazin and Mary and Steve. It was so warming of my heart to hear your kind words at this time. And I'd just like to speak a little bit about my father, a true hero, and just say that, you know, this is really not a time for sadness so much as a time for celebration. Mark, you and I know that my father was a tremendous man of God, and he believed that this world was not the final place, but just a transition point for a much greater blessing for thereafter. And I was so blessed that I had a father who, to me, was an adventurer. To leave a small island in Tobago in the mid-1950s to be one of the first people of Caribbean descent to go to McGill University and then be in the first or second class accepted to medical school, to start a practice and a family in Toronto. Mark, you knew he spoke 5 languages because he settled into an immigrant area of Toronto in what's known as Little Italy, and had a practice consisting mostly of Italians and Greeks and Portuguese and French and Caribbean, and he spoke all those languages: French, English, Spanish, Italian, Greek. He was functional in them all, and raised 5 great kids, me being one.
Not to brag on yourself at all.
Not to brag. You know, 2 doctors, a lawyer, Parsons School of Design graduate, and a businessman. But more importantly, instilled in us a deep sense of purpose, a love of both academics and intellectual striving, and a love of God and the spiritual endeavors. So if God comes back to us one day, Mark, and says, here's the deal. We will allow you to live till you're 93 years old. You will have a powerful impact on your family, your community, and all around you. You shall be in good health and good sound mind and strength until the very end. And then when I finally call you home, you will be surrounded by your good friends and your family, and you will so pass in peace to my arms, basking in the love of those around you. That's a deal that I would gladly take. So I just want to thank everybody for their very, very kind thoughts, but also tell people don't weep for my dad and weep for me, because we're all smiling and he's laughing, and it's a joyous time. So thank you again.
Yeah, and you know you'll get a lot more emails too, Dave. We're recording this much earlier than normal on a Friday, and of course the podcast just went live yesterday. I've had many people reach out to me who said that they've sent you emails or will be sending you emails, and that touched my heart. But there are a couple things I didn't say about your dad. I thought about afterward. You know, he was someone who had presence Like when he walked into the room, he owned it. He just had this dignity. He was always very well dressed, tailored suits, cufflinks. Even the more casual affairs, he'd have his suit on, wouldn't he, Dave? He was
sure would.
With his nice, stately hat. And boy, you brought back memories when you talked about his office, because I've been in to see him in his office many a time. But the legend lives on. But the thing that's so crazy is we did a Zoom family call right on Christmas on December 25th, and there he was in the call. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, he's gone home, and he passed just almost the same day as Aunt Rosie, right? I think she was January 9th.
Yes, he did.
Guess what, Dave? You're not getting out of a college admissions vernacular in a tough one today either, man. I'm not feeling sorry about you. So let's transition. Sometimes I get these tips from my meetings with students, and that's the case this week. One of the students I'm working with in Colorado, he applied to a school and they reached out. They said, we need some information because we're not understanding your curriculum. And what actually happened was the school had switched from the quarter to the semester system mid-year. And so it was confusing on the other end. And so that led to my tip, which is make sure that you are in communication with your school counselor to find out what they are saying in their COVID essay, because counselors have a 500-word COVID essay, and it's the expectation on the part of colleges that the school counselor will let them know if they're doing something different. And a lot of schools are doing this thing where they're going to a modified curriculum, or they're switching from, semesters to quarters, or maybe they're going credit, no credit, or they're altering something in their educational structure, and they expect the counselors to reveal that. But if they don't, then, you're going to be the one that potentially could suffer for that if a school doesn't reach out. So the tip is to find out what your school counselor says in that 500-word description. That's not something that's confidential, and they should willingly and readily share that with you. And that will let you know whether you need to supplement something that they didn't say about your academic situation. Okay, vernacular.
All right, my friend.
This is from a school standpoint, not just a general standpoint.
Okay, am I going to have any mercy points this week?
No mercy points, none. You're back in the frying pan, man.
Oh, man. Bereavement is over.
The word is auxiliaries. Auxiliaries.
Extracurriculars.
What are you talking about, extracurriculars? Okay. What do you mean extracurriculars?
Well, like extracurricular activities.
No. I was going to give you a hint. Auxiliary services. Another hint. Auxiliary services.
Auxiliary service. Oh, wait. Maybe special services that the colleges give to students with special needs?
No. So good try, though. Good try. So I almost picked an article on this. So one of the things that's made the pandemic so hard, Dave, is colleges offer a lot of auxiliary services as a way of bringing revenue in that has been curtailed or shut down in the pandemic. What are some examples? Housing, dining, event planning, vending machines, parking on campus, hotels on campus, bookstores. These are all what colleges refer to as auxiliaries, and they're sources of revenue outside of tuition, room and board, and student fees. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And because of the pandemic, they're getting none of the auxiliaries.
Correct. Yeah. Look at you using the word already.
Absolutely.
Already incorporated into your vocab. All right, Dave. We got a good article today. Let's fire it away. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
The Common App will no longer ask about disciplinary records by Elana Lyn Gross of Forbes. So basically, the Common App is eliminating a question that asks college applicants to disclose if they have been the subject of disciplinary actions in their high school. And it found that this question disproportionately impacted low-income students and students of color. And furthermore, that when those students disclosed that information, a significant portion of them never ended up applying or going to college at all. So the statistics are, as you know, Mike, the Common App is in 1 million. It's used by over 1 million students. It involves over 900 colleges. And it turns out this question about disciplinary records was added in 2006 at the request of only some of the colleges. Well, first of all, the Common App found that Black applicants were responding to this particular question 2 times more than whites. And they found that students who answered these disciplinary questions were significantly less likely to matriculate. In fact, they found that of the 7,000 students who answered the question and eventually did not matriculate, 31% were Black, while they're only 11% of the applicant population. 21% were Hispanic, while they're only 16% of the applicant population. And that, here's the other thing, even though 25,000 applicants self-reported their disciplinary actions, the high school counselors themselves only flagged 5,000 of their potential students for disciplinary reporting. And here was the real crux of it, that many wealthy and white guidance counselors were not allowed to disclose the disciplinary processes of their students by fiat of the school. So in other words, if you were African American or low income, not only were you more likely to respond to the question, but your school was much more likely to report you even if you didn't. Whereas if you were wealthier or from a different ethnic group, you had a much greater chance of being afforded grace. So that's why they eliminated it, as well as some other questions regarding criminal background. Mark, is that a good summary? And where would you like to take that?
Yeah, it's a great summary. And the timing of this is spot on because, you know, Amin and I in our interview, this comes up. And I remember when it came up, I was wondering if people were maybe following what we were talking about because it came up sort of tangentially. And now after this conversation, you'll know exactly what we're referring to when this comes up in our conversation about the additional information section. But I will say this, like this was a really tough one for me. And I was torn by the decision because when you're in admissions, you want knowledge. You do. You want people to give you the information and you feel like, no, give it to us and trust us. We have the ability to discern. You know, we won't hold it against you. We can put it in proper context. And so as Dave mentioned, the question was added in 2006 at the bequest of colleges. So what happens is the Common App is a membership organization and it's always surveying its membership. So it's surveying the high school counselors to ask them, you know, it'll survey students and they'll survey colleges and ask, how can we improve it every year? So the colleges asked for this. Because think about it from a college standpoint. Wouldn't you want to know if you're reading a file of somebody, if they've had a significant discipline infraction? Of course you do. And colleges almost always err toward the side of give us more knowledge. That's why sometimes people have to be careful when they ask a college a question. Occasionally I'll hear them give an answer that is in their best interest, but not always the student's best interest, you know? Like, for example, a student might say, like, if I took the ACT 2 times or 3 times and I took the SAT 2 or 3 times, like, how do I know which one to submit? Now, I'm going to tell them to submit their highest scores, but the colleges will say, just send them all to us. You know, send them all to us. But then in some cases, it could actually work against you. Somebody in the office could say, look, this kid took the test 6 times. You know what I mean? They should have scored higher than they did. So colleges always want more information, and I totally get that. But here's the other side of it, and I do understand this. You know, in baseball, the saying, Dave, 3 strikes and you're out.
Right.
It's kind of 3 strikes against this policy. First of all, there's a large body of research that show Black and Latino males in particular are more likely to be written up for discipline than white students. There's also very interesting similar research about males in general compared to females. And it's kind of a hotly debated topic within education that, you know, are females written up less because it's mostly white female teachers who think like women. And so they don't understand that some behavior that's just typical of boys being boys is seen as inappropriate and causes write-up. So there's disparity between males and females in this, and there's disparity just with Black and Latino males in general. So that's one thing. And Dave shared the data to show you've got some disparity in the data racially. So that's the first thing. The second thing is research showed, and it came out in this article, that when a student has more discipline, they are unlikely to apply to college. So discipline became a disincentive. They saw the question and, it never went through with the process. There's some strong data. The article has the statistic to show that. But I think the third thing, and I think this was the nail in the coffin, Dave, that led to the change. This is what really became dispositive, is that the research showed that students in wealthy white school districts are not reporting this data.
That's correct.
They're not reporting it. So just to be clear, people may not understand this. There's a question on the Common App to students that asks you if you've had discipline, but it's also a question on the Common App that in the secondary school report that the counselor has to complete. And so they could clearly see by the data. In fact, here's a quote from the article. Jenny Rickard, president and CEO of the Common App, told the Wall Street Journal, one of the most concerning findings was that although 25,000 applicants self-reported, so here's the student self-reporting, their discipline last year, guidance counselors only flagged the issue to colleges for 5,000 people. So then she goes on to say, many of the guidance counselors, especially in schools with higher wealthy populations of wealthy and white students, said their districts or schools did not allow them to disclose this information. So one of the hot debates in college counseling, and actually Anika and I did in the news about this, I think in year one, it was a long time ago, was should high schools disclose discipline infractions or not to the colleges? And what happens in more affluent suburbs and private schools is, especially private schools, because parents are like, I'm paying all this money and you're going to sabotage my kid's chances by reporting that infraction?
Yep.
And so they put a nail in that right there, and they just stop it from happening. And Dave, I'm going to share a story of how I saw this happen. And I know you and I were talking. I'd like you to share the story that you shared with me before we started that used to happen at the private school you were at. And I think that would be interesting. So I know the school that I was at, that I worked at, of course there would be discipline. These are teenagers. So kids would get in trouble for drinking marijuana, sometimes more serious things like selling drugs or stealing. And they were about to be expelled. But just before they were expelled, they would pull out and withdraw so that it would not be on their record that there was ever any discipline. And that's just what their lawyers would give them the advice to do. And Dave, why don't you share the story you shared? Because I think that's even more compelling.
Well, when I grew up in Toronto, we went to these private schools, and there was only about 12 of them at a time. And we had what was called a delinquency exchange program. Every year, there would be some student who was just too much to handle, either stealing, and the school would be presented with a dilemma because really they wanted to kick him out. But especially those small elite schools, if his father wasn't on the board or chairman of the board, he golfed with the person who was on the board. So they couldn't actually share. So every year we'd come in and all of a sudden student X would no longer be at Crescent School. They'd be at St. George's School, and student Y would no longer be at St. George's School, but to Crescent School. And so it was well known that the way they actually got rid of their discipline problems were actually to swap the kids out of school. And they justified it that they just basically needed a change of scenery, and maybe they did. But certainly, my experience now is working on the south side of Chicago, where, it's hard for kids to walk down the street now going to school without getting into some sort of gang involvement. And a lot of kids come from broken homes, and a lot of them come from stress issues, and they don't get the benefit of ADD diagnoses and so forth. It's really hard for a lot of these young men to get through school without several arrests or disciplinary infractions. But what you've also found is that many of them can be saved, and that going to college is just what they need to get them out of that situation. But disclosing a criminal or a misdemeanor record or an expulsion, even if they can get into certain schools, in their minds pretty much closes the door, like no one will accept me. So it really is a night and day experience between kids, depending on their status and where they go to school. Did you find that, Mark?
Yeah, I got one more story to tell.
Yeah.
So 4 weeks before graduation, 4 seniors, the school I was working at, they all went out drinking, got drunk, which was a strict violation. And, the school I was at, it had a tremendous amount of integrity. It was very different than most of the other private schools in the area. They really prided themselves on treating everybody the same. It's one reason I worked there for so long. And so they got expelled 4 weeks before. And these are some of the richest families in the school. In fact, I remember one dad, he'd retired in his 30s and he was driving a $165,000 car. Now, that's 15 years ago. That's a lot of money. That's a lot now.
Wow. Right.
And
that was pre-Tesla.
Yeah. And I was talking to him, and because I'd met so many of these families that had just retired really early and they got bored. And I said, don't you think you're going to get bored? And he was like, if I get bored, I'll buy another company. And so he was, we ended up his daughter getting kicked out. And then they just started suing the school like crazy. Went to court and there was all these court cases. And one of the parents said, and they kept losing. And they said, you know what, we're just going to sue you and sue you and sue you and make you pay, for what you've done. So people don't want some of that stuff to happen. So a lot of times they just, end up not reporting it. And so, I was torn with this
and I just say, do that enough, and one of those kids is going to become president.
Well, the thing is, what message are you teaching your kids?
That's right. Absolutely.
That's the thing that we used to always say. What message are you teaching your kids? Your kids are learning not to take responsibility. Dad will use his money to bail you out. But so I think, Dave, I was torn in this article because, like I said, when you're at admissions, you want knowledge. And so the idea of not having that data is disappointing. And so, to be honest, I was really torn about whether I agreed with this decision for that reason, just because I know how valuable it is. But I think in just talking with you and talking out loud, I think I've come to realize that if people end up paying by different standards, it doesn't make sense. Sure, colleges are losing data, but the previous system had so many inequities that I guess it just was untenable. It sounds like you agree that that they made the right decision.
I think they made the right decision. The cautionary tale I would have with students is, if you're having issues and difficulties, so often now it spills out into your social media activities, and that can derail you much more powerfully than a self-reported question on a Common App ever can. So be careful. I mean, this is one area where they're affording kids grace, but once again, the life is still full of many pitfalls.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason why I'm torn about it is because let's say you have a situation where a kid threw a kid up on a locker and pulled a knife out and put it, and threatened a kid with a knife, or said something, I'm going to murder you, or about something really serious. As a school, you want your community to be safe. You want to have that knowledge. The idea that something like that went down and you got some pristine transcript and you picked some recommenders who wrote nice things about you and a rosy picture was presented of you, and now you're coming into our community and you're endangering our community. Let's assume, the student didn't learn the lesson and they continue that behavior. That just is not something that settles well with me. So this is really one of these ones where I don't like either of the options. I don't like the fact that schools are no longer tipping off people that potentially could be injurious to the life of the college or the residential life. But I also don't like having a system that's so fraught with inequities. So it kind of feels like a lose-lose.
Well, the last thing I want to say, though, is that people can change. And I will give the example. I'm not going to mention his name, but if anybody ever saw that Nova series on Harvard Medical School graduates, he was one of the doctors on there. And there was a good friend I knew from Harvard Medical School who grew up in Texas. He was white. He grew up, trailer poor. He got involved in drugs and gangs, and he ended up going to prison for over a year in both Texas and Arkansas State Prison for grand theft auto. When he got out of prison, he got into weightlifting into prison. He went to State University of New York, Brooklyn. He became the NCAA powerlifting champion and got on the Olympic team. He suffered an injury and then went back and applied for medical school and ended up getting into Harvard Medical School. And when he graduated, he had 2 diplomas on the wall. And one said, graduate of Harvard Medical School. And the other said, you have now completed your time in Texas and Arkansas state prisons for grand theft auto. And he often would mention that he was more proud of his prison diplomas than he was from his medical. So
I think it's a classic case of 2 sides to every story, because that's one side. Yeah. But yet, I know from talking with you, Dave, you've got properties, of course.
Yeah.
And one of the things you've learned to do is to try to make sure that you're selecting the right tenants.
Yeah.
And I think if there was knowledge, let's say, I'm just making this up, but let's say somebody was applying for one of your, rent one of your properties, and you found out there was a history of theft or vandalism or breaking and entering. And if there was you had a choice, you could either see that information and make a decision on it, or it became a law that you weren't allowed to see it. You would probably say, no, I want to have full knowledge. So I just want to kind of give you how the schools feel about it, just to give you that perspective. You know what I mean?
Well,
when I put it that way, you see the other side of it, right?
Well, landlords are evil. We have no grace. We don't care.
If you know.
No credit, no room.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, Anika, you are joined in North Carolina now by Dr. Lisa Ruff. She arrived in Chapel Hill on Friday.
Welcome, Lisa.
Of course, we're going to recruit you back to Georgia.
Yeah, I'll see you later, Lisa.
And thanks, Lisa, for subbing for Dave last week. You did a great, great, great job.
Oh, yeah, she did.
Okay, so now I am doing a countdown. We're going to hit number 3 on the Twitter followers today.
Oh, I didn't know we made it that far. Okay.
Yeah, but we'll start out in a quick review. Number 10, Kim Kardashian. Number 9, Ellen DeGeneres. Number 8, Ariana Grande. Number 7, Lady Gaga. Number 6, Taylor Swift. Number 5, Cristiano Ronaldo. Number 4, Rihanna. And number 3... Katy Perry.
Oh, I like Katy Perry.
I can tell by how you reacted.
Her and Orlando. That's my cute little couple. I like them.
109.2 million.
Ooh. Okay,
that is rocking Twitter. So we just have 2 left next 2 weeks. Number 2, number 1. And I already went and found another countdown after this because I'm loving this countdown stuff. It got me back in it. So we got another one next week.
I know you did.
I got, I'll wait till then and share what it is.
Okay.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Okay, Anika, we are in chapter 156, and we are looking at student loans. And the question today is, how do you actually accept a student loan? Like, do you do nothing? Do you have to do something? And we're particularly focusing on federal loans. You read the chapter. What were your takeaways?
Mm-hmm. Well, you absolutely have to do something.
That's true.
And so what that's going to be is in response to a notification that you can get, which you can get it in the mail, which I didn't realize. But obviously, most people use email. You get this notification. I know I'm so familiar with all the online portals that the schools offer. So your kid has their account, have to log in and they got to go check all their stats, where basically all their communications come from. And you go in and you select that you are going to accept that thing. I was a little fascinated, and I feel like I should have known this, but maybe I forgot. I don't know that you don't actually have to accept everything in there. I guess the assumption is that you do so, but you don't have to do that. Even, I guess, more specifically about having to only accept part of the loan. You don't even have to accept the whole loan. So that was interesting.
Yeah, the paper is rare. I can't even remember the last time somebody got the paper, but there was, when you got so many different schools out there, you got different approaches. And yes, you do need to go in. Normally, of course, you'll get the initial email, but it's going to be through your portal, your student portal. And then you need to accept, and you can choose to accept certain items, not other items. And as you mentioned, so let's say you get just making this up. Let's say you get a $2,000 unsubsidized loan. And let's say you're like, well, I think I might want $1,000. You can switch that $2,000 to $1,000 and take half of it. Or you could take $500, or you could take none of it. You also don't have to accept everything right now either for the federal loans. What
do you mean?
There was one year with Karis where she ended up taking that loan in about February or March.
Okay.
She thought she could make it through the year without the loan, and then needed a couple $1,000, and then around February, March, she took it.
So it just sits there and waits on you? It doesn't go away after you don't accept it?
Doesn't go away.
Wow.
Not the federal one.
Okay.
That's till like June 30th of the year you've completed. So,
okay.
So you can, if you're not sure, you can hold off. It's really flexible. It's really flexible that way. Now, and you do want to go through line by line, and you do want to make sure you understand what all these things are. That's a big mistake. People don't understand it. They don't know that they can refuse it or take part of it, or they don't understand exactly what the terms are. You really need to understand those terms and know everything. And if it's a federal loan, I would go to studentaid.gov. That's your standard. That's the main website for all federal money. Anything to do with federal money, studentaid.gov. That's where I would go for everything. Now, do you remember reading anything about master promissory note? Me talking about that at all? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I do. That and what you're mentioning about knowing the terms and all that stuff, that's within that, I guess they require you is it most times or all the time that require you to do the online loan counseling?
Yeah. So for federal loan entrance counseling, you're going to need to take it for your first federal loan. Okay. And that's the loan counseling. And then the master promissory note is just your contract. That's just the contract that you understand what you're doing and you're making a commitment to repay.
Okay.
And so those are the things that you have to do. And so that's kind of all I had on this chapter. Short and sweet. Anything else you want to add?
The sweetest ever.
I don't think we've ever done one so short. Record.
Not in a long time.
Not in a long time. All right. Well, I'll make up for it on the question.
Well, let's dive into it.
Sure. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right. So our question this week comes from Tazeen. Did I say that right? Tazeen from California.
Yeah.
And Tazeen wants to know how you can tell how selective a college is. How do we know that?
So this is a great question. And the reason why is I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. So if you, for example, just go into Google and you type in rank colleges by selectivity, what do you think you'll find, Nick? Any idea?
Well, I'm guessing those doggone rankings are going to pop up as a link first, and you just kind of see all that.
Actually, usually not, because the rankings usually are formulas that have multiple things that they have used to come up with, and of course their formulas all vary.
Yeah, okay.
This is pretty simple. When you go in and you do it, you'll typically get a list of schools, and they'll simply list them based on acceptance rates. So who's ever got the lowest acceptance rate, they'll say is the most selective. The second lowest will be the next most selective. And while that's gives you a general idea of selectivity, it's actually a pretty flawed metric. And I'm really surprised how many articles are out there on that. Like, so many people, U.S. News, CBS goes on and on and on. They have articles, colleges ranked by selectivity, and they simply list the acceptance rate.
Okay.
And any idea why that's not a good answer? Why that's flawed?
I don't, because I'm guessing it's all about numbers. Like, okay, they're at 0.5%, they're at 0.4% or 2% or whatever. So I don't know.
So you're right. It's all about numbers, but it's not only about acceptance rate. The reality is colleges have an ability to manipulate their acceptance rates.
Okay.
And there's an incentive for them to do so. So I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but there's three biggest ways that people look at statistics when they're looking at status for colleges. Are rankings, the one you mentioned earlier, right? Lowest acceptance rate and highest test scores. Those are the three most common ways that people, if they're trying to assess prestige, they look at those three things. And so colleges are very much aware of that. So all three of them are manipulated and have been manipulated. I mean, many, many, many schools, we've written some articles on this, have gotten in trouble by manipulating their test score data to try to climb their rankings. And huge fines. And remember we did a big article on Temple?
I do remember
they got
that.
fined for that, their business school.
Yeah.
And many, many others have done it as well. Well, the same thing happens with acceptance rates. Schools manipulate their acceptance rate data. So any idea how a school can manipulate their acceptance rate data?
If you gave me 5 minutes, but I know we don't have that much time.
It's actually a hard question. It's not the easiest question. So there's several ways that they do this. Remember when we talked to Anika before about Snap apps, Fast apps, VIP apps, Priority apps? You know, and you know, you get them in the mail and they just say, hey, you have been recognized. You're the most outstanding person, blah, blah, blah. No essay, no app fee, nothing. Just sign your name here. So one of the big reasons why schools do that is to increase their applications. And literally all you do is sign, something. Okay. And so that's highly controversial because that's one way that schools boost their applications by having these things.
Okay.
Second thing is there's no real official definition of what constitutes a completed application. So, if a school has their own online app and if somebody starts it but doesn't stop it, some schools don't count that as a completed app. Others do.
Oh, my goodness. Come on.
They're trying to get as many apps as they can so they can say they have the lowest numbers. And then others say, no, that's just not right. And there's no official definition, no standard definition. A third thing is something that this is one of the huge hidden secrets in admissions because it's kind of how the sausage is made and it's very unsavory and it's not really told to the public. Recruiting to reject. Recruiting to reject is one of the easiest ways to decrease your acceptance rate. There's lots of ways colleges, not all, but many retreat to reject. I'll tell you a simple way you can jack up your applications. And this is not necessarily as unethical, but it's just done. So I'll leave it at that. Is you go on the common application, right? Because it's so easy for people. And then you don't require anything. You don't require an essay. You don't require recommendations. You don't require anything other than transcripts and grades. And lots of people will say, well, you're on the Common App. I've already done anything. Let me just check the box. And all these things are done to jack up the number of applications. So then you can turn around and say, look how selective we are.
Oh,
And why do schools do that? Well, they do know how the public thinks. When your acceptance rate is low, people will have a tendency to think, ooh, this school's really amazing. Now, what does that do? It triggers a couple other things. One, it makes somebody more likely to enroll because they feel more honors conferred on them. I can't tell you how many times people say to me, I got in this school and the acceptance rate is like, they'll say this really low number. And they're like, I have to go. Like, what a privilege. I was one of the few they took. So they know it increases their yield. They also know that once you're increasing your yield and once you're sort of increasing your prestige, then you can charge more money because people value the acceptance more. So they can get more money. So all these things go on behind the scenes. This is sort of the ugly part of admissions.
Right.
And this is why one of the many reasons why acceptance rate in of itself is a flawed metric. Another reason why it's a flawed metric is because sometimes certain schools are so well known for being really selective that a lot of students just won't apply to them. So, and I'll use Georgia, for example, because I'm here in Georgia. There's 3 really, really selective schools in Georgia: University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Emory. Now, at the rate Spelman's going, they're going to get really close to, being that 4th school on that list. But,
oh, wow.
But right now, those 3 are the most selective. And if you look at, and this is brand new data, I'm going to use Georgia because they've already released their 2021 early action data, which just came out this year. They've already got the data out. So they had a 38.7% acceptance rate. Now, that's pretty selective, 38.7. We've said before, only 20% of schools accept less than 1 and 2. So, you're in that group, but it's not crazy selective. It's not even 1/3, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not actually a good gauge because here's some other data when you look at it. Their ACT scores, middle 50%, 32 to 34. Their average APs, middle 50%, 8 to 13 APs. And GPA 4 to 4.24. So why you're saying, well, wow, those numbers are really high. I would think the acceptance rate would be even lower. The reason for that is in the state of Georgia, most people they're not going to apply to Georgia or Georgia Tech. Unless they're really, really at the top because they're, you know what I mean? Because they, so that's another factor is some schools, their acceptance rate is thrown off because people just know kind of not to apply there.
It's interesting.
Other factors that throw the reasons why acceptance rate isn't great is rates can vary substantially between in-state and out-of-state. Staying in Georgia again, Georgia Tech, 39% in-state acceptance rate, between 14 to 16.5 out-of-state, depending on the year. So that's a huge thing. And then different programs can really lead to different acceptance rates. So I'll step outside of Georgia here. Carnegie Mellon, let's use them. Their Dietrich College of Humanities and Social Science has a 26% acceptance rate, but their School of Computer Science has a 7% acceptance rate.
Oh, wow.
Their School of Architecture has a 34% acceptance rate. Their School of Drama, guess what their acceptance rate for the School of Drama is, Anika?
Pretty darn low.
It is. I'll tell you that.
I can imagine. I'll say 5%.
4. Good
wow.
job.
Look at that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You may remember that. I did a spotlight on them. I said, they're not so known for computer science, but drama's even harder to get into.
Wow. Okay.
So 34% for architecture, 4% for drama. So once again, acceptance rates can be skewed for that.
Wait, so let me ask you a question, Mark. So when you do that Google search and it comes up, okay, these 20 schools are in this order, are they all not broken out? Like, you have your subsets with these schools and these programs within the institution? Like, how is that number recognized?
They're not broken out. That's one of the reasons why I'm pointing out that it's a flawed metric to simply look at that. It's not broken out by in-state, out-of-state. It's not broken out by major. It's not broken up by any of that. It's just a general overall number.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you say, well, Stuck, that's a private school, Carnegie Mellon. Well, here's a public school. Let's look at UMass Amherst, okay? Overall acceptance rate in 2020, 65%. But for the School of Nursing, 10%. So, so this is public, private. It affects all of them. So you're thinking, well, okay, you've convinced me. Be careful with acceptance rate. So what is the answer? And keep in mind, acceptance rate is a good general gauge, but I showed you through all these examples why it's flawed overall.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the best thing is to combine acceptance rate with multiple other sources of data. And what are those sources of data? Well, test score data. Even if a school is test optional, looking at their middle 50% combined with acceptance rates gives you a lot more data. Average GPA. If you go back to all the stuff I mentioned earlier that that Georgia released in their 2021 class,
Mm-hmm.
it had the average GPA on there. It had the average test score data. And then it also had other factors. It had the average number of AP classes, the middle 50% being 8 to 13 APs. So it's really multiple sources of data when you combine them that gives you the best gauge of selectivity. Now, there's not one source that has all of this. The best place to go is to just Google the name of the school and pull up class profile. And the class profile is usually this 1 to 2 page document that has the main stats on it for the school. And when you look at all those stats in their totality, you can get a picture of the selectivity. And sometimes there'll be some unique stat that one school might have that another school may not have. I'll give you an example. I mentioned before, Georgia Tech, 39% acceptance rate for the state of Georgia, which is really high. Like if you live in Georgia, Georgia Tech, you know how hard it is to get in. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to have like 1580 SATs way up there at the top of their class, and they don't get in Georgia Tech in state. But guess what was one thing I found on their school profile, their class profile, looking it up, Anika? Guess what percentage of students of the incoming Georgia Tech class were either valedictorian or salutatorian, number 1 or 2 in their class? What do you think for the whole? All the students that came in, you were either ranked number 1 or number 2.
Oh, I'm gonna say 75%.
No, not that high. Everybody in the school would have been valedictorian or salutatorian.
Hey, it's possible.
No, 30%, but that's still really high.
Yeah, okay.
So basically almost 1 out of every 3 kids. Remember, most people are coming from big public schools with 500-600 in their class.
Mm-hmm.
And so pretty much 1 out of 3 were ranked 1 or 2. So when you look at all the data in this totality, that's how you really can gauge selectivity.
Okay.
Now, but someone might be thinking, I don't have time to go check every class profile out for every school. I just want a quick overview. Is there something out there to help me? The only thing that I will say is the website Niche has come up with a better metric than just acceptance rate. They've come up with it's a pretty simple formula, but it is better than just acceptance rate. So it combines 2 metrics. It combines acceptance rates with test scores. And by just looking at those 2, you really do get a pretty good gauge. So if you don't want to go to the class profile, which is the most accurate way, you could use Niche's rankings where their formula is 60% of their formula is acceptance rate and 40% of it is test score. And by using those 2, it's not as precise as, all the data I'm sharing, but it's a lot better than test scores only. So if you want something that's just quick, easy, Mark, I don't have time to go check every single school profile out. I just want a quick gauge. Then I would be comfortable using that, but just know that it doesn't have a level of precision, but it's better than acceptance rate only.
All right.
What are your thoughts? I've said a lot here.
Well, let's not focus on those acceptance rates. Let's focus on our social, academic, and financial match with the schools. Let's not even go there.
Yeah. So, and let's talk about that. So selectivity is important. I'm not going to say that it's not. One of the things that does make a school experience great is that you are surrounded by people who are highly motivated and going somewhere with their life. Because if you look at it, you're in class maybe 15 hours a week out of 168 hours. So who you're around really does rub off on you.
Yeah.
But don't fall into the trap of thinking more selective equals better.
Right.
And you know what, Anika? I haven't done one in a long time, so don't shoot me down. A corny illustration. You know it's coming. You knew it was coming before I even said it. A corny illustration.
It's okay. It's been a while.
So give me a little grace. So Anika and Javon, they're bored. They said, let's go to the movies. So you go to this big AMC complex. There's like 16 movie theaters there, and you notice that, some of them have really, really long lines, longer than others.
Mm-hmm.
So you say to yourself, you know what? We're wide open. Let's get in that line. That movie must be really good. This has got a really long line. Well, Janae's over there, and she's like, said, what? See, I'm going to go to this movie over here. Okay, that doesn't have as long a line. Guess what? There is no guarantee that just because you and Javon went to the line that was really long, the most selective, the hardest one to get in because everybody's trying to get a ticket, there's no guarantee that you saw a better picture than Janaea.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a dud or was that okay?
It was okay. I just would have been in line with Janaea and Javon would have been by himself.
It was okay illustration. It just wasn't realistic. You got the wrong girl.
Yeah, wrong line, Mark.
But at least my illustration was okay. See, the thing is, okay with Anika is like, to me, that's like A-. I just
all good.
See, I treat you like, the teacher that grades really, really hard, and at the end of the class, then they throw everybody bonus points.
Gotta keep you on your toes, Mark.
That's my own ego. That's just my ego talking. But hopefully it made a point.
It did.
And great question to Zine. So, I think my more important question is how much focus should be put on selectivity.
Right.
And some of it's going to depend on the person,
Mm-hmm.
Some people, they really, really want to be around people that are going to push them. I have a question on my questionnaire that every student I work with completes. And I ask, do you want the students that you're going to college with to be at your level, above your level, below your level? And, I get all those answers. But that lets me know right away how important selectivity is. So sometimes people say, I want them to be above my level. I'm like, okay. Now, this selectivity is important to this person. Now, keep in mind, that's still relative, right?
Right.
It could be a student if it's a 2.5 student, then above their level could be a school that attracts kids with 3.0.
Right.
So all that's relative. But I do think selectivity is important. It's just not the be all and end all.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, I would say the average person puts too much emphasis on it. More than not enough emphasis on it, but I'm not going to say it's not important because who you're around, can push you, and you're starting to build your network in college, and I think it is important to be around people that are going to bring out your best in you, and if you can just cruise and not be challenged, then you're not going to kind of bring out the best in who you are. Does that make sense, Anika?
Perfecto.
Okay.
Sense. Hopefully
we gave you an answer there, Tazeen. Very good question, though, because it's one of those questions that you might think, well, isn't that a simple answer? Well, kind of wasn't that simple. It was kind of more complex.
Right. All right, Tazeen.
What do you got going on this week, Anika?
I got a nice little break tomorrow. Woo woo.
MLK Day?
Yes, we actually get it off. I'm so excited.
You know what, though? I have to say this about MLK Day. So, and this is one thing I have to, I really liked when I was at Westtown.
Mm-hmm.
They said, Martin Luther King didn't just want us just to have another day to lie in bed and do nothing.
Oh, so, I didn't say that, Mark.
I didn't mean to imply that. So what they did is they turned it into a day of social justice, activism, and service.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think that would be better if every school did that. If every school. I put it this way. If Martin Luther King was here and you said to him, would you want your day just to be another holiday? Or would you want it to be a day that people went out and either did service to the under-resourced families, whether it's a soup kitchen or something, or something related to social justice? I don't even think you could get the words out of your mouth before we would get his answer.
He might give us some grace and let us sleep in a little bit. Like,
you may let us get up at 10, maybe.
Fine.
Get up at 10 and then go do your service, right?
You'll be fine.
I hear you.
I'm sure he'll say that.
Awesome. All right. Well, enjoy your week. We'll see you next week.
You do say. Toodles.
Okay, friends. We are transitioning to part 2 of my interview with Amin. First, one thing I do need to apologize for you guys. The sound quality is not that great on this interview. I have to tell you what happened. I'm on with Amin. We're on for an hour and we're having technological problems. We can't get things to work. He's a very busy vice president, okay? Then we schedule another session. We're on for 40 minutes. We can't get the technology to work. And, I've known him for a long time, so he's really great. He says, Mark, let's schedule a third time. This time I reach out to the tech people. I'm like, what? I can't have this happen a third time. Do you know how embarrassing it is? And they said, does he by any chance work at a school? And I say, yeah. He said, some schools have these firewalls that block our software out. So you might want to use another recording service. So that's what happened. So we ended up using Zoom video. I love the stock. Don't like it for podcast recording. You can notice a difference in quality. It's because we're on Zoom video, not on Squadcasters and Casters. So just a little bit of warning there. But in part 2, Amin shares examples of how the additional information section is a place where a student can be vulnerable and share deep personal things that sometimes they don't even share with their own counselor or teacher, and they don't want the teacher or counselor to know about. I ask Amin about a few specific times when grade drops are appropriate to add in the additional information section versus times when they shouldn't be added. We talk about discipline incidents, like I mentioned earlier with Dave, and I ask Amin how that should be addressed or not addressed in the additional information section. And that will dovetail really nicely with the conversation that Dave and I just had. Then we transition to activities, and we discuss when is it appropriate to talk about more activities and add them in your additional information section. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So, can you share a couple of examples of what you were referring to, something that maybe is so personal that maybe not only does the counselor not know, but the student may not want the counselor to know, but the student has shared it, in this section, and you found it to be helpful?
Sure. I've found things, that have to do with identity, individual identity, of exploration of, race consciousness or sexuality, or sort of choices that a student may have made in their environment because of expectations, not because of conviction, choosing to leave an activity and pivot in a different direction, perhaps. So, there are a range of ways that those experiences might be shared. And so it's not, it's difficult to think specifically about those areas. But I do think that from the standpoint of the student's self-assessment and thinking about how are they perceived by their peers, by their teachers, and how do they want to project to an audience that hasn't met them. And so the additional information is one space, but there are other, as you know, spaces where they can come through and tell their story in their own words, right? Most notably, their essay, which is another area that allows them to disclose important information, and interview for those schools that offer interviews either with alumni or with admission deans or current students. All of those areas are opportunities, but whether or not the student feels comfortable disclosing the additional information is a little bit different, because it's not person to person. So it's not an interview. You're not required to sort of be vulnerable in that way in front of another individual. Your essay and your additional information is, there's a reader or readers, but you don't know anything about their background, right? You have no idea who they are, what experience, what biases or blind spots they may possess, how empathetic or compassionate understanding they might be of your situation. But again, this is the regret piece of, don't go through a process and feel that you have to conform to expectations that you don't fully understand and that haven't been articulated, but be the best version of yourself and be unapologetic about that. Because if a school is going to accept you, they want to accept you for who you are, not for who you want them to think you are, right? And not be able to accommodate you in that way. So
let me ask you a specific question with grades. So I think there's some things that are pretty obvious. Like, let's say, your parents went through a tumultuous divorce and it impacted you. I think that would be something that everybody would say, yeah, that'd be something that we certainly want to know about. Or maybe you were sick with mono or something for a long period of time, or you're hospitalized, or, there are a number of things I think that are pretty obvious. What if a student transferred from one school to another, and the school they came from just, it didn't have that same level of rigor, or their foundation wasn't as strong as the school they're transferring into? Is that something that would seem like excuse making, or is that something that you think would warrant mentioning, or is it all about how it's said versus whether it's said?
No, that's actually a good example of depending on the specific school or the counseling, right? And I don't know that it matters much public versus private, but more whether or not the counselor is going to speak to the transition, what courses. So tracking is a problem in some spaces where students are brought into schools and may not be directed toward, the honors or AP or the IB program. And so depending on their experience, if there are courses that are off limits or that the student is not able to fully engage, you often hear an admission speak, and I use this in quotation marks sometimes, the most demanding program available, right? It used to be the case that everyone spoke about that as if that was the recipe for success. If you had the most demanding program available, you were going to be more competitive, more attractive, and more successful. What that didn't fully, acknowledge is that it's the most demanding program appropriate for that student, depending on their particular strengths. So if a student, for example, transitions in schools, as you mentioned, and isn't taking the honors AP IB program because of the point of entry or the recommendation, that has an impact on the way they're going to, present themselves and be understood. So in that situation, absolutely, they should say, you know what, I opted not to do, just to use the IB example, I opted not to do the IB diploma because I was more interested in a breadth of study, or electives that my school offers. And that's how I approach my education. Someone else might feel that they have to do the diploma because that's what colleges want, quote unquote, or expect, and therefore are abandoning areas of real intellectual interest and passion, right? To conform in order to be better prepared or to be much more successful. So both of those scenarios, the student can and should speak to. But if the counselor has already framed this out and explained the curriculum, what's available, what's not, how they've engaged, it's less critical. But a student may not know that and might not want to leave that to chance. So I'd rather read it and say, oh, that's redundant or familiar, not redundant, it's familiar, than have to try to intuit the reasons behind a student showing up or not showing up in certain programs of study and their performance.
Yeah, that's great. And there are actually a lot of these different curriculum type of decisions. You could have a student that took French 1 in 9th and French 2 and 10th and French 3 and 11th. And, you may think, well, why don't you take French 4 or 4 or 5 or whatever? And then they jump down to Spanish 1. But in reality, the French teacher left and the school doesn't offer it anymore. Or there was a conflict. And the only time they could take that class was the same time they could take AP physics and they were an engineering student. And there's those kinds of things are things that I'm sure you would want it to be, notated either by the counselor or somewhere in the application. Am I correct?
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing to substitute for good information that can be triangulated, whether it stands alone and makes sense in the context of the transcript. So in the situation you described, we would look at a transcript and say, oh, this student has foregone the 4th year of foreign language, but they're doubling up, in science. They have the physics and biology AP, or they're choosing to take stats and calculus or something else. But it then triangulates to perhaps, not always, an expressed interest. To your point, if the student's an engineering student, we're going to expect that they're going to have a high level of, math and science, right? And have strong preparation in that area. If they're undecided, it's a different way of approaching that application. And certainly if students are applying to specific schools within universities, the expectations can vary pretty significantly from the School of Arts and Sciences to the School of Engineering to General Studies, whatever the case may be. So for that reason, it's not one size fits all, but the individual application needs to be modified to the destination, to the targeted destination.
No, that's great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, because we are living in times of extreme turbulence in Michigas, I'm going to give you 3 recommended resources for this week. The official recommended resource is a weekly education newsletter from Politico. Shout out to James Mason from Mississippi, who's been one of our most dedicated listeners from the start of the podcast. He sent this one to us. All you do is sign up for the free newsletter. You get an email with links to the top educational stories of the week. We'll put a link to all of Politico's free newsletters in our show notes, but look for the one that says weekly education. Now, after the events in the Capitol on January 6th, I've been driven to understand the origins of white nationalism or the white power movement. It has led me to two outstanding books I want to share with you. The first is a classic. It's called Bring the War Home by Kathleen Belew. Belew focuses on the origin of the white power movement, and she traces the main factors that have led to its growth over the last 50 years. Belew spent over 10 years researching this book. She's a professor at the University of Chicago. Once again, her book is called Bring the War Home. The second book I am reading now goes right up to the events in the summer of 2020 and is written by Cynthia Miller Idris, a professor at American University, who has also made studying right-wing hate her life's work, both internationally and domestically. Her book is called Hate in the Homeland, and the subtitle is The New Global Far Right. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented solutions. So there you have it. 3 recommended resources this week. I realize 2 of them are history books, but it's important to understand the world we live in if we're going to be effective change agents in this world.
Now let's talk about discipline. Let's say students had a discipline incident. It could be anything. It could have been plagiarism. It could be drinking or drugs or something like that. And there's something on the academic or something there that's involved some type of suspension. Is this a place where you would want a student to address this?
So this is a tough question because my institutional and personal preference is yes. But because schools vary in the way they treat this information, you have to be careful not to have a student inadvertently put themselves not in harm's way. I think we all have to be accountable for our actions, right. But there are differences in discipline and treatment and remorse, and restorative justice and that sort. So I think it varies. I would say because we are a community as a liberal arts college, and we'll talk more about Wesleyan, specifically later perhaps, but because we're not only admitting a class, but also building a community, we want to know and be comfortable with the individuals that we're inviting, into our community. And so we don't expect perfection. We don't expect that someone, who's had a challenge or made a poor choice, a lapse of judgment, should be prohibited the possibility of enrolling. So disclosing and owning and sort of talking through, if you will, and showing lessons learned and dealing with that is appropriate, can be appropriate and helpful. It's not disqualifying by any means or necessarily. We're a second chance school. We don't look at that information up front. We look at it after the fact and balance it with the decisions we've reached. Different schools have different approaches and sensibilities around this, but we're clear in the fact that young people are young people and they're going to make mistakes. It's about what they learn from those mistakes and how they frame those lessons and avoid repeating them again. So because some schools have policies of not sharing and put the burden of responsibility on the student, what you don't want is a school to share that information and not have the student share it, to try to hide it or dismiss it. That would not be appropriate. Most schools are going to want students to own their actions and present their perspective and experience. And that's what we would want. We would want the student to share in ways that are appropriate, not necessarily in an essay, but in the additional information, so that we have it to consider and we can make informed decisions.
No, I'm really glad you added that nuance. And I'm not sure if all the listeners caught that, but it means referring to the fact that high schools have different policies on whether they disclose disciplinary infractions. And colleges have different policies on how much grace they extend to people that have had infractions. And so one thing I that came through loud and clear from what you were saying, though, Amin, is, if it is a school that is going to disclose it, now there is going to be a question, that we're going to have in it. If you're truly, penitent and contrite, or if there's, a greater explanation to understand greater context, it behooves you to explain that to us because we're going to be getting that information from the school if your school's already sharing it with us. Is that an accurate rendition of what you were saying?
Yes, I think it is.
Okay, good. So let's talk about activities. So that's another thing where this comes up a lot. So I'll have a student say, you know what? The Common App gave me 150 characters to describe an activity. That's like 30 words. I'm really passionate about this activity. Can I elaborate on it in the additional information section? Because I just felt like that 30 words / 150 characters didn't do justice for something I've been working on for 4 years of my life. And what are your thoughts on that being an appropriate place to use the additional information section?
I think it can be, depending on what the activity is. If it's something that is familiar and mainstream, that someone would read it in the description of the extracurricular activity as a sport or another commonly understood activity, I don't know that it needs a lot of elaboration. But if it's something that's a bit unique or not available through your school that you're pursuing independently, outside of school because of limitations of resources or depth of commitment, I'm doing it at school, but I'm also doing it in my, on my own time, if you will, club or something to that effect. That can make sense. I'll give you an example of where, when I talk about context and how it matters, and, admission and students and others are, we're all prone to use to some degree, acronyms, right? And so you have acronyms that are thrown around, and I sometimes will say, I recall vividly when I was starting in admission reading things like GSA, and the GSA had different meanings depending on where you were. In some areas, it might have been used as the Gay Straight Alliance. Right. In others, it might have been the Girl Scouts of America. Right. And yet in others, it could have been the Governing Students Association. So the same three letters, but radically different, kind of organizations and experiences, right? So if there's ambiguity, then feel free to elaborate, to distinguish, and to share. But what we don't want, because there's enough room in the extracurricular profile, we think, for students to list not only their activity, but their distinctions and achievements, is to feel compelled to use that space even more. It is meant to be brief, pointed, directed. And again, I come back to, you'll have a chance, hopefully, in an interview or with a counselor to speak to that.
That's good. That's good. Now, I've had some students that say, it's limiting me to 10 activities. I really got 12 or 13. Should I use the additional information section here? What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like, well, if it's not one of your top 10, then don't include it? Or do you feel like, if you've got a couple more you want to share with us, by all means, do it?
Well, I mean, I'll leave it to the students to decide if they want to do that. My question would be is, where do you sleep? When do you sleep? That's what I want to know. That's just the additional information. If your activities run that long, if your list is that long, the other part here, and I'll just use this as a space, as an opportunity to speak to, it's important, I think, for students to understand that it matters far less how many activities you have and what they are than why you do them, right? The why is more important than the what. So how are you spending your time, and why are you spending your time in that way is more important than I have a laundry list of activities, some of which matter, others don't, but I'm pursuing them for whatever reason. So it's, again, sort of providing the insight into the why, right? This is, and I'm doing these activities now. Some of them may line up with academic interest or with other familial responsibilities or a number of other things, but usually there's a narrative that's beginning to form and to be shared, where you can see those activities in letters of recommendation, in the essays, in the interview, and other spaces, so that you don't have things that are just sort of floating out there without elaboration or without, context or understanding of how it fits the experience or the interest.
No, that's real helpful. That's good stuff, Amin.
Next week in the news, the college degree is dividing America. What does this mean for higher education? A great article by Eric Kelderman of the Chronicle for Higher Education. Mark and Anika will discuss what kinds of expenses can parents who have children in college potentially claim on their taxes. A question from a listener is, how does one know if what their kid is doing from an extracurricular perspective is enough? And our college spotlight will be the University of New Hampshire.
But today, our college spotlight is the University of New Mexico, UNM. And it is our first time plucking a school out of the state of New Mexico. And so we're going with the flagship. University of New Mexico is located in Albuquerque. It is on 600 acres, but they have branch campuses in Gallup, Los Alamos, Rio Rancho, Teos, and Los Lunas. When people refer to UNM, they use the acronym and use it to describe many things. UNM, University Next to the Mountains. And one of the reasons that occurs is because this is an elevated school in the mountains. Same elevation as Denver. And there's a joke. Mile High City. Yep, the Mile High City. There's a joke. What do you know about New Mexico? UNM, usually not much. It is located on routes. It is one of those schools that flies under the radar. It is located right on Route 66. And many, there was a famous movie about Route 66. And the nice thing is it's only 5 miles from the airport. So very easy to just fly right into Albuquerque and get to UNM very easily. Now, Albuquerque is only 1 hour away from the state capital, which is Santa Fe. UNM is a Division I school. It is in the FBS, which is the highest region for football, offering 16 sports. And the teams are known as the Lobos. Dave, any idea what a Lobo is?
Isn't that a wolf?
Oh, how'd you know that? I didn't expect you to get that.
Los Lobos, man. I remember that 70s band.
Good one, man. I didn't know that. Good job. Spanish for wolf.
That's right.
Spanish for wolves. They compete in the Mountain West Conference. They have two different mascots. One is Lobo Louie and Lobo Lucy. And one thing about New Mexico is that place has school spirit. Ever watch a basketball game? I mean, it is electric. They'll blow the roof off of the place. Huge school for when it comes to sports school spirit, especially basketball and football. Just emanates out of the place. Any idea who their big rival is, Dave?
All right. Well, you're in New Mexico. Is there a University of Santa Fe? No. Probably next to UNLV. UNLV.
That's a good guess. That's a really good guess. The answer would be New Mexico State.
Okay.
Yeah. The Lobos have won national championships in skiing and in cross country. Official school colors, cherry and silver. Now, one reason students choose UNM is the campus beauty. This place is seated at the bottom of the breathtaking Sandia Mountains in the lap of Albuquerque. Beautiful landscape campus. It has striking Pueblo Indian architecture and Spanish architecture. So if you're a mountain person like I am, views are striking. At any point on campus, you can see the majestic mountains. The largest hospitals are all on the campus right there. So we'll get to talking a little bit more about the strength of the school when it comes to the medical program. Dining, it's won number of awards for dining. Routinely is up there for schools with the best food, and they offer 24/7 dining options. Now, as far as admissions, rolling admissions, pretty simple process. This is not a school that's doing holistic admissions. No essay, no personal statement, no recommendations. In fact, most of the time, if you reach out to the rep, they'll waive the app fee. Rolling admissions, and they pretty much promise 2-week turnaround time. Get your app in, bang, you should have a decision back right away.
Cool.
Semester system, over 200 majors. Engineering's one of their strengths. Of course, they've got the basics like chemical, civil, electrical, and mechanical, but they've also got some other real good specialized programs such as construction engineering, nuclear engineering, and computer science engineering. Business is another strength of the school, and one of the nice things about their business programs, they really emphasize internships. 74% of all of their students complete an internship, and guess what the average length of the internship they complete, Dave?
I'm going to say 6 months to a year.
Good guess. Of course, you gave yourself 6 months. Okay. That's like saying,
I'll make it 6 months. 6 months.
2 days to 20 years. That's like guessing that. So 10 months. So that's a pretty substantial internship, And of course, they've got the accounting and the finance and the marketing. You would expect that for any flagship school to have that. But some of their other programs that are really strong are entrepreneurship, international management, operations management, human resource management, organizational leadership, and film and media management. Now, guess what company is headquartered in Albuquerque, Dave?
Oh,
I'm going to give you a hint. You own their stock.
Oh my. Okay. Well, it can't be.
You don't own that many, man. So
I don't own that many. I'm what's Mark buying today? I'll just get one of that. PayPal.
Netflix.
Oh, Netflix. That's right. I didn't know about Netflix. I forgot I own Netflix. Okay.
Netflix. Another strong program, architectural environment planning and design. And every student gets their own studio, which is pretty cool. Health sciences and sports sciences is strong. Athletic training. This is a program that has a 100% pass rate on the national board exam. And when it comes to nursing, they offer the BSN, the MSN, and the PhD. They have a strong doctorate in pharmacy program, strong exercise science, and they're one of 13 schools in the country that offers a bachelor's of emergency medical science.
Oh, wow.
Bachelor's of emergency medical science, Dave. That's up your alley.
I've never heard of that, but okay, we'll talk about that later. That's interesting.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Also known for art, dance, film, and music. In fact, their photography program can compete with some of the top programs in the nation. And when it comes to theater arts, they've won a lot of awards, particularly for dramatic writing. Their Tamarind Institute has a national reputation, and there is where the UNM's College of Fine Arts is housed. And they offer a lot of research and training, especially in lithography. Another strength of theirs is Model UN. They've got one of the most competitive Model UN teams in the country. It is known as the World Affairs Delegation, or WAD, and they have been ranked in the top teams in the country year after year, multiple awards at different major competitions. Most notably, they took home the goods at the Harvard World Model UN competition in Geneva, Switzerland, and also in Pueblo, Mexico. And most recently, they won the Diplomacy Award and the Resolution Fellowship. Wow. Now, when it comes to the state, UNM boasts the state's only law school, the only medical school, the only architectural and urban planning school. So if you're in the state of New Mexico and you're interested in law, medicine, architecture, urban planning, there's one game in town, UNM. And they are really known for their Latin American Studies program, their Southwest Studies program. That's one of their real strengths as well. They have many paid research opportunities too for undergrads. And that's another thing that they offer, high-level research. One of the places they've really sort of carved out a niche is the research they do on solar energy. So a lot of people that are really into research in solar energy will seek them out. So I've got a lot more here I want to share, particularly about their scholarships, because they've got quite a bit here when it comes to scholarships. So let me share that, and then I'll get your thoughts, Dave, and then I'll share stats.
No problem.
So one of the things, a lot of times it's not that easy to go to a flagship school and pay the price people want to pay if it's out of state, because flagships attract so many people. They really don't need to do a lot of tuition discounting to fill up. But UNM's a little different. They're quite generous. They've got a Regents scholarship that covers full tuition, fees, and housing, and renewable for 4 years. It requires a 3.9 GPA, and you need a 3.3 to keep it. So you can go incredibly affordably for that. And normally a 31 ACT, by the way, but this year they dropped the ACT requirement with, COVID. They also have an Amigo scholarship, which is also quite generous. For this one, you need either a 23 ACT, 1130 SAT, and a 3.5 GPA, or 26 ACT, a 1230 SAT, and a 3.0 GPA. And this is going to be $15,500. And you might think, well, that's not that much. Well, wait till we get to their costs. Their costs are actually really low compared to most schools. And then we have the Western Undergrad Exchange, the WUI program. So they're part of WUI and WUI Plus. And this is, we've talked about this before, these educational compacts. But if you're a resident of Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Nevada, South Dakota, Oregon, Utah, Washington, or Wyoming, and you're a U.S. citizen, then you can go to UNM and only pay 1.5 times the residential rate. As normally out of state is close to triple the cost of in-state, anywhere between 2.5 to 3 times. And in this case, you can pay just 1.5 times the cost. And all you need for that is a 2.8 cumulative GPA or an 18 SAT, or a 3.0 cumulative GPA and a 20 SAT. And the difference is whether you're getting in WUI or WUI Plus. WUI Plus has even more benefits. Basically, it's a $15,000, $500 benefit there. And so the strongest programs overall would be Latin American Studies, Native American Studies, Business, Studio Art, Engineering, Chicana and Chicano Studies, Navajo Language Studies, and Anthropology. Dave, what did you learn you didn't know?
Well, we talked last week about how it's so important to focus on these schools that are available to such a wide variety of students and that offer a lot. So you have University of New Mexico. It actually is in a really gorgeous area of the country. And I'm looking at all the degrees it orders. These are really practical degrees. First of all, it's a full range of engineering. So if you want to be an engineer, nuclear, construction, chemical, it's got all of that. It's got a great medical pre-med program. It's got the only medical school of the state. It's got all 3 degrees of nursing from BA to master's to a PhD. It's very high on business and anthropology and also the visual arts. And, you're talking about getting scholarship money with a GPA going down to 2.8 and an 18 SAT. So once again, we talked last week that never has there been a broader range of colleges and great educational experiences for the average student. Not to say that the average student is not a great student, but you just don't have to be Einstein. And I think this is another great selection and a great option for kids who may feel discouraged and think, is there a college out there? I mean, this seems to be hitting on a lot of these points, Mark. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about their affordability, Dave, as well. I've talked about the scholarships, but let's talk about the base price. Yeah. And so they start out, once again, when I list price, I'm listing cost of attendance. For those of you just listening, okay. Cost of attendance is every penny you spend. It counts the pizza, the Uber ride, the concert, let alone things like student fees, tuition, meal plan, room and transportation. It's everything, books and supplies, all of that, right? So their start price, Dave, out of state is $40,000 for out of state and $24,500 for in state. Wow. So take that minus that 15 or that 20, and you can see how this is a place that families that don't have any savings or that don't make a whole lot of money could possibly go and maybe even have no student loans at all.
That's right. Because we have to because 40,000 minus 15, plus remember you have the paid internships and you have the paid research fellowships. And Mark, just remind us, if you're doing a 10-month internship, what do you think the average student is going to take home from that?
So it's going to really depend, Dave, because the internship fees tend to be highly correlated to what you're interning in.
Right.
So they're not all the same, right? So some of the, computer jobs and the engineering jobs and some of the business jobs, they do pay more than certain other ones. Certainly, like when you look at, if I go by the data from Drexel and Northeastern that are both like 98% co-ops, their average student's getting 17 to 20 an hour.
Wow.
Now New Mexico is a lower income state. And so that may be different in that region, but the bottom line is you can put away some nice money.
Right. So, working hard, internships, working after campus, scholarships, you can easily get that 40,000 to maybe 5 or 10,000, and with a good summer job, possibly graduate with virtually no student debt.
Yeah, and that's for a family that hasn't put away any savings, or maybe is in a place where they are unable to contribute that much. So I think, it's very, very out of state friendly. They're really trying hard to recruit more out of state students, and it's a school that, what'd they say? University of, I forgot it already. The one you laughed at. Never heard of
much.
Or something.
Usually not much.
Yeah. What do you know about us? Usually not much. So I think that we had to give them a little shout out.
Well, I was going to ask you, and you're probably about to say, what's their acceptance rate?
Let me go stats. Let's go stats.
Okay.
So total enrollment, 16,724. Undergraduates, 13,472. So about 3,500 grads. And that's small for a flagship. That means you're going to be able to access teachers and professors. And you're not going to get lost in the 40, 50,000 person school. Male-female ratio, 44% male, 56% female. SAT ranges, these are the 25th to the 75th percentile, meaning middle 50%. Remember, 25% are under this, 25% are above this. For evidence-based reading and writing, 520 to 630. Math, 510 to 630. ACT, 19 to 25. 74% of students receive financial aid. This is impressive. So I've said before in the podcast, 39% of people are eligible for the Pell Grant. You've heard me say that before, Dave?
Yeah.
About 4 in 10 students. Yeah. 37% of students at UNM are on the Pell Grant. So they're pretty much mirroring the population socioeconomically. Yes. So you're getting a real world experience as far as the socioeconomic demographics of the school. 10,912 applicants, 52% acceptance rate. So about 1 in 2 get in, 46% yield. So that's a high yield. They're almost 1 out of every 2 that get in go.
Wow.
Now grad rate's a little lower, 50% grad rate, and that's the 50% grad rate, and that's the 6-year rate. And one of the reasons for that is they have a lot of non-traditional students. So they have a lot of, students that are 25 or older, that have kids, that have jobs, that go part-time. 87% of students are from the state of New Mexico, and really large Hispanic population, which to be understood because they're New Mexico, right? Take a guess what the Hispanic percentage of the school is, Dave.
Go say over 30%.
49.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 49. Great. So 49% Hispanic, 6%, and here's another high one, 6% Native American. When do you hear those numbers?
Never.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're over 1%, that's huge. So,
yeah. 4% Asian, 2% African American, 3% multiracial, and a little under 40% Caucasian. Not a big Greek school. Just 5% of the men are in the Greek system and only 6% of the women. Want to take a guess on their 2 biggest overlaps, Dave?
Okay. You already said New Mexico State. And I would still say either University of Arizona or Nevada.
You came so close.
Oh.
Arizona State.
Arizona State. Okay.
Yeah. And CU Boulder. CU Boulder.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's a couple other Western large state schools. And then, of course, like you said, New Mexico State. And that's the Lobos for us there.
Solid school. I mean, and it sounds like the kids are very happy. You said lots of howling at the moon when the basketball team is out.
Yeah, one thing they're known for is not being an unduly stressful institution. They're known for having more of a laid-back culture. And some of that comes with the Western. You pick that a lot up more in Western schools.
Yeah.
But I think that's also just part of their ethos of who they are. They're up in the mountains. And, they pride themselves on that. And there's just different types of schools out there for different kids. And what we're trying to do in the spotlights, is just bring you guys different exposure to different schools that maybe have flown under the radar, that, that not everybody, when you open and read a New York Times article, is being talked about all the time.
Yep. Awesome. Well, the Lobos are a good addition. So, and one day we shall see how a Lobos goes up against the Hokie Bird.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Visaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.